Michael sat at the kitchen table, his laptop glowing faintly in the dimly lit room. The once cozy suburban home he shared with Laura now felt heavy with an unshakable tension. Something had been gnawing at him for weeks, a subtle but persistent worry over their joint savings account. His usual morning routine of balancing the checkbook turned into a daily ritual of unease. The numbers didn't add up. "What's this?" he muttered, scrolling through their bank statements. Charges to high-end boutiques, luxury spas, and restaurants he hadn't visited began appearing with increasing frequency. Laura's explanation of bills suddenly seemed far too convenient. The discrepancy in their finances, coupled with her recent distant behavior, painted a picture Michael didn't want to confront, but couldn't ignore. Later that day, his suspicions were confirmed when he found a crumpled receipt tucked into the corner of their shared desk. It wasn't for groceries or household essentials, but a designer watch, engraved with a note reading, "To Jake, with love." Michael's stomach dropped. He knew that name. Jake was Laura's so-called business associate, someone she'd mentioned casually in passing. A man who he now realized was far more than just a colleague. Fury and disbelief coursed through him, but his rational mind quickly took over. He didn't confront Laura right away. Instead, Michael spent the next few days gathering evidence. He went through more receipts, emails, and even checked their credit card history. Each discovery cut deeper. Expensive gifts, hotel bookings, and cryptic calendar entries confirmed what he feared. Laura was siphoning their joint savings to fund her affair. That evening, Michael confronted her, holding the damning receipts in his hand. Laura, tall and poised as always, tried to dismiss the confrontation with a dismissive wave of her perfectly manicured hand. "Michael, you're overreacting," she said, her voice laced with feigned indignation. "It's just business expenses. You know how chaotic my schedule gets." Michael's calm facade cracked. "Business expenses?" He flung the receipt onto the table between them. "Since when does your business involve gifting a man a $5,000 watch with love engraved on it?" Nora's expression faltered for the briefest moment before morphing into defiance. "You're spying on me now? You're being ridiculous." "I'm being ridiculous." Michael's voice rose, though he maintained his composure. "This isn't about trust anymore, Laura. It's about betrayal, emotional and financial." Laura tried to guilt him, tears welling in her eyes. "How could you accuse me of this? I've been nothing but loyal." "Loyal?" Michael's voice was sharp as steel. "You drained our savings to fund your lover, Laura. That's not loyalty." Laura shook her head. "No," she said. The argument ended with Laura storming out, slamming the door behind her. But Michael didn't need her confession. He had the proof, and he had a plan. The betrayal had awakened something in him, a determination to reclaim his life, his finances, and his dignity. This wasn't over. Laura would soon learn that betrayal comes with consequences. Her friends would have to struggle to maintain themselves as she tried to revive her. The next morning, Michael sat alone in his home office, a steaming cup of black coffee in hand. The sun streamed through the blinds, but its warmth didn't reach him. His mind buzzed with the weight of the betrayal, yet there was a strange sense of clarity amid the chaos. He knew what he needed to do. It was no longer about the hurt or the lies. It was about survival. Michael needed to protect himself, financially and emotionally, and ensure Laura paid the price for her deceit. He began by methodically listing everything they shared: the house, the cars, the bank accounts, and investments. Every asset was intertwined, built on years of hard work. Yet now they had become weapons in a silent war Laura had waged behind his back. Michael realized that the financial trail she left behind wasn't just evidence of her betrayal, but also his leverage. The first step was consulting a lawyer. He reached out to a firm known for handling high-stakes divorce cases. During their meeting, Michael laid out the evidence: bank statements, receipts, and details of Laura's expenditures. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Evelyn Moore, nodded approvingly as he explained his situation. "You have a strong case," Evelyn said, flipping through the documents. "The misuse of joint assets for an affair is clear grounds for a favorable divorce settlement. But there's one thing we need to act on immediately: securing your financial position." Michael leaned forward. "What do I need to do?" Evelyn explained the importance of protecting the remaining savings and ensuring Laura couldn't access any more funds. She recommended transferring a significant portion of their joint account into a personal account under his name, emphasizing that it was within his rights given the circumstances. Michael hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was too drastic, but the memory of those receipts and the smug look on Laura's face during their argument pushed him forward. That night, while Laura was out, presumably with Jake, Michael logged into their online banking portal. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he prepared to transfer the funds. He hesitated, not out of guilt, but from the gravity of what he was about to do. It wasn't just money, it was the symbolic end of their partnership. The remaining steps required precision. Michael knew Laura would retaliate once she realized the money was gone, so he worked quickly. He updated his direct deposit information for his paycheck, ensuring it would go to his personal account. He also made copies of every financial document and stored them in a secure location. Evelyn had warned him that divorce battles could get messy, and Michael intended to be ready for whatever Laura threw his way. He grabbed a pad of paper from his pack and placed it inside the trash bag. As the weekend approached, Michael began to shift his focus to the house. He walked through each room, cataloging their shared possessions. Some items, like their wedding photos, he left untouched, relics of a life that no longer existed. But others, such as the expensive furniture and electronics he had purchased, he marked for removal. He rented a storage unit and discreetly began moving items there, careful not to arouse Laura's suspicion. Meanwhile, Michael's interactions with Laura became increasingly cold and distant. She noticed his aloofness, occasionally commenting on it with sarcastic barbs. "Still sulking, Michael?" she said one evening, pouring herself a glass of wine. "You're acting like such a child." Michael didn't respond. He simply watched her, noting how comfortable she seemed, how little remorse she showed. Every word she spoke, every dismissive gesture, solidified his resolve. Laura believed she had the upper hand, but she was about to learn otherwise. One evening, as Michael finalized his plans, he discovered an unexpected ally, their neighbor, Tom. Over beers in the backyard, Tom admitted he'd seen Jake visiting the house while Michael was at work. "I didn't want to say anything," Tom confessed, "but I figured you should know. You deserve better, man." Michael thanked him, the revelation adding another layer to his plan. With each new piece of evidence, his strategy became sharper, more deliberate. By the time he was ready to confront Laura with the divorce papers, Michael felt no anger, only determination. He had done everything in his power to protect himself, and now the ball was in her court. As he closed his laptop and turned off the lights, Michael allowed himself a small smile. The man Laura thought she could deceive was long gone. In his place was someone stronger, smarter, and ready to reclaim his life. The morning Michael chose for the confrontation was deliberately unremarkable. A typical Saturday in their suburban neighborhood, lawns being mowed, children riding bikes, and the smell of fresh coffee wafting through the air. Inside their home, however, a storm was brewing. Michael was in the kitchen, preparing his usual breakfast of toast and eggs. Laura breezed in, her phone in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. She was dressed casually but impeccably, her blonde hair cascading in waves down her back. She greeted him with a perfunctory morning, barely glancing his way as she scrolled through her phone. He watched her for a moment, silently assessing the woman he had shared a life with for over a decade. She looked every bit the polished, confident partner he had once admired, but the veneer of trust and loyalty was long gone. Today he would strip away the last of her pretenses. "Laura?" he said, his tone calm but firm. She looked up, surprised by the seriousness in his voice. "We need to talk." "What about?" she asked, an edge of annoyance creeping into her tone as she leaned against the counter. Michael gestured toward the dining table, where a manila folder lay closed, its contents meticulously arranged. "Sit down." Laura frowned but complied, her curiosity piqued. She set her coffee down and took a seat across from him. "What's this?" she asked, gesturing toward the folder. Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow sip of his coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough to unsettle her. Finally, he slid the folder across the table. "Open it." She hesitated, her manicured fingers resting on the edge of the folder before flipping it open. As she scanned the first page, a bank statement highlighting the withdrawals she had made, her confident facade began to crack. Her eyes darted to Michael, then back to the document. "According to the document," she whispered, "the money was in the savings account." "What is this?" she asked, though her voice betrayed her understanding. "Keep going," Michael said, his voice devoid of emotion. Laura turned the page and found a receipt for the engraved watch she had gifted Jake. Beneath it was a copy of a hotel booking and, finally, a series of photographs showing her and Jake together, laughing at a restaurant, holding hands outside a boutique, and in one particularly damning image, embracing in front of the very house she shared with Michael. Her face went pale as she snapped the folder shut. "You've been spying on me?" she demanded, her voice rising. Michael leaned back in his chair, his expression cold and unyielding. "I trusted you," he said evenly. "I trusted you with our life, our finances, and everything we built together. And you repaid me by draining our savings to fund your affair." "It's not what it looks like," Laura stammered, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "Jake? He's just a friend. Those photos, they don't mean anything." Michael shook his head, his patience wearing thin. "Don't insult my intelligence, Laura. The evidence is right there. I've seen the bank statements, the receipts, the photos. I know exactly what you've been doing." Laura's defiance flared. "So what? Are you going to throw away our marriage over this? People make mistakes, Michael. That doesn't mean you destroy everything." Michael's voice remained calm, but his words were razor sharp. "You destroyed it, Laura. The moment you decided to betray me, not just emotionally but financially. You didn't just cheat on me, you robbed me. You took what we built together and handed it to another man." Her eyes filled with tears, but Michael was unmoved. For years, he had been the one to compromise, to forgive her flaws and overlook her selfish tendencies. But this time was different. This time, the damage was irreparable. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," Michael said, pulling a second folder from his briefcase. "These are the divorce papers. I suggest you read them carefully before signing." Laura's tears gave way to outrage. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "You're really going to throw everything away over this? What about the house, the savings? What about us?" Michael's lips curled into a bitter smile. "The house is in my name," he said. "As for the savings, I've already moved what was left into a personal account. You'll find there's nothing left for you to siphon off." "Have you eaten in 2 days?" Sam asked. Michael laughed. "Oh." Laura's jaw dropped, and for the first time she looked genuinely afraid. "You can't do that. That money is mine too." "No, Laura," Michael said, his tone icy. "That money was ours. But you made it clear where your priorities lie when you spent it on your affair. You made your choice, and now you'll live with the consequences." She stood abruptly, knocking her chair over in her fury. "You're a bastard, Michael," she spat. "You think you're so righteous, so perfect, but you're no better than me." Michael stood as well, towering over her with a quiet strength that made her take a step back. "I may not be perfect," he said, "but I'm honest. And I won't let you drag me down with you." Laura's defiance crumbled as the weight of her actions finally sank in. She sank back into her chair, her head in her hands. "What am I supposed to do now?" she whispered. "No man's feel justice like that," said Nick with a bitterness in his voice that surprised her. Michael's voice softened, but only slightly. "That's not my problem anymore. You made your bed, Laura. Now you'll have to lie in it." At last, Michael broke the last of the capture. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving her to grapple with the ruins of her choices. For Michael, the storm had passed, and as he stepped outside into the crisp morning air, he felt a profound sense of relief. For the first time in years, he was free. The house, once a sanctuary of shared dreams and a life built together, was now a hollow shell of its former self. Michael sat alone in the living room, the walls echoing with a silence that felt heavier than words. Laura had left that afternoon, slamming the door behind her with a fury that shook the picture frames on the walls. He had expected an explosion, but her venomous parting words still lingered. "You'll regret this, Michael. You'll see." He didn't regret it, not for a moment. With Laura gone, Michael began dismantling the remnants of their life together. He cleared out the last of her belongings, dresses still hanging in the closet, designer shoes lined neatly in rows, and trinkets that once felt like signs of a loving partnership. Each item was a painful reminder of her betrayal, but as he packed them into boxes and stacked them by the door, the act felt cathartic, like exorcising a ghost from his home. Laura had left in her car without a plan, or so she claimed, but Michael knew her too well. She had always relied on others to save her from herself. He suspected she would try to find refuge with Jake, but he doubted her lover would welcome the new, financially empty Laura with open arms. After all, Jake's interest in her had been as opportunistic as her own actions. Michael's phone buzzed on the coffee table, interrupting his thoughts. It was Tom, the neighbor who had unwittingly played a part in confirming Michael's suspicions. "Hey, Mike," Tom said cautiously. "Just checking in. Saw Laura storm out earlier. Everything okay?" Michael let out a dry laugh. "Depends on your definition of okay," he replied. "She's gone. Took her things and left." Michael stared at him. Tom hesitated before responding. "Well, if it's any consolation, you're better off without her. You deserve better than what she did." "Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it." Michael hung up, his chest tightening. Better off or not, the loss of trust, the betrayal, and the sheer emotional upheaval had left scars that would take time to heal. For a relationship to recover. He wondered for the 100th time if he was lost for good. The next day, Michael met with Evelyn, his lawyer, to finalize the details of the divorce. As they reviewed the paperwork, Evelyn's sharp legal mind reassured him. "Laura doesn't have much ground to stand on," she said, tapping her pen against the documents. "You've secured the financial assets, and the evidence you provided makes her infidelity indisputable. The settlement should be straightforward." Michael nodded, though he felt little satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about moving forward. "I just want this done, Evelyn. No drawn-out fights, no theatrics." "You've got it," Evelyn said with a small smile. "She'll have to accept the terms or face a losing battle in court." Meanwhile, Laura's world began to crumble. Jake, unsurprisingly, had no interest in playing the role of savior. When she showed up at his apartment with a suitcase in hand, he answered the door with a raised eyebrow and a dismissive tone. "Are you angry with me?" she asked. "Laura," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "what are you doing here?" "I left Michael," she announced, expecting sympathy or excitement. Instead, Jake's expression hardened. "You what?" he asked, incredulous. "And you thought coming here was a good idea?" Laura faltered. I thought we could be together." Isn't that what you wanted? Dr. Fairmont? Jake let out a harsh laugh. Laura, you drained your husband's bank account to keep me around. What do you think happens now that the money's gone? Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment and anger. I thought you cared about me. Jake's response was cold. I liked the perks, Laura. But I'm not in this for a lifetime commitment. He stepped back and closed the door, leaving her standing in the hallway with her suitcase and shattered pride. For Michael, the days following Laura's departure were both challenging and liberating. The quiet of the house, once oppressive, began to feel peaceful. He returned to routines he had abandoned during the turmoil of their failing marriage: morning runs, cooking meals for himself, and reconnecting with friends he had distanced himself from. One evening, he joined his friend Peter for a drink at their local bar. Peter, a man who always spoke his mind, wasted no time. "You're looking better, Mike," he said, raising his glass. "Getting rid of her was the best thing you could have done." Michael chuckled. "I don't know about looking better, but I feel lighter." Peter grinned. "See? Told you. Toxic people weigh you down. Now you can start fresh." The idea of a fresh start appealed to Michael more than he expected. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, it felt like his to shape. Back at home, Michael tackled another daunting task: repainting the master bedroom. It had been Laura's domain, decorated in her preferred muted tones and filled with her expensive furnishings. Now it would become his space, a symbol of reclaiming what was once shared. As he rolled a vibrant blue paint onto the walls, he thought about the life he had envisioned with Laura and how it had unraveled. Betrayal had burned that life to the ground, but from the ashes, something new could grow. The walls, now rich with color, felt like a promise to himself, a commitment to rebuild, not for anyone else, but for his own happiness. When the paint dried, Michael stood in the doorway, taking in the transformation. The room felt brighter, lighter, and unequivocally his. It wasn't the end of his journey, but it was a step forward, a quiet triumph in a story that had once been defined by loss. For the first time since the betrayal, Michael allowed himself a genuine smile. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was beginning to thrive. A month had passed since Laura's departure, and life had slowly begun to take on a new rhythm. Michael stood in his backyard, tending to the small vegetable garden he had neglected during the tumultuous final years of his marriage. The quiet hum of bees and the crisp autumn air wrapped around him, bringing a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. His hands worked the soil, planting seeds for what he hoped would be a vibrant spring harvest. The act was more than just gardening. It was a metaphor for the fresh start he was cultivating in his own life. The divorce proceedings had moved swiftly, thanks in large part to the airtight case Michael and Evelyn had built. Laura had signed the settlement agreement without much resistance, though her bitterness was palpable during their final meeting. She had muttered something about him being heartless before storming out of Evelyn's office. Michael didn't let her words linger. They were just the echoes of someone who couldn't face the consequences of their choices. Stuart noticed. With the legal battles behind him, Michael turned his attention to creating a life that was authentically his. He began volunteering at a local community center, teaching financial literacy classes to young adults. The work was fulfilling, allowing him to use his skills to empower others. It was during one of these classes that he met Rebecca, a bright and driven woman who worked as the center's coordinator. Rebecca was unlike anyone Michael had encountered before. She was warm, compassionate, and unapologetically herself. They bonded over shared values and a mutual love for literature. Their conversations began as casual exchanges during coffee breaks, but quickly evolved into something deeper. Michael found himself smiling more, laughing at jokes he hadn't heard before, and rediscovering a part of himself that had been buried under years of tension and betrayal. One crisp Saturday morning, Michael invited Rebecca to join him for a walk around the local lake. The water shimmered in the sunlight, and the trees were painted with vibrant shades of red, orange, and gold. As they strolled along the path, Rebecca turned to him, her eyes filled with curiosity. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" she asked gently. Michael nodded, his steps slowing. "Yeah, I have. But I'm learning to let it go. I can't change the past, but I can choose how I move forward." Rebecca smiled. "That's a good perspective. Not everyone can see it that way." They walked in companionable silence for a while before Rebecca reached out and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. Michael felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling of hope he hadn't realized he'd been missing. That evening, Michael sat at his desk flipping through old photo albums. The pictures of his life with Laura no longer filled him with anger or sorrow. Instead, they felt like relics from a story that had ended. He closed the album and placed it in a box labeled Past, tucking it away in the back of the closet. It was time to make space for new memories. He settled in front of the pile of magazines and scanned them for an article titled "How to Live with Fear." He pulled out his journal, something he hadn't touched in years, and began to write. The words flowed easily, capturing his thoughts, his hopes, and the excitement of starting anew. He wrote about Rebecca, about the garden, about the peace he had found in the quiet moments of solitude, and about talking with his daughter. The next day, Michael hosted a small gathering for his friends and neighbors, a housewarming of sorts, to celebrate his fresh start. The living room, once filled with Laura's carefully curated decor, now reflected his personality, bright, eclectic, and welcoming. Rebecca was there, mingling effortlessly with his friends. As he watched her laugh at one of Tom's jokes, Michael felt an unfamiliar but welcome sensation: contentment. Later that evening, as the last guests departed and the house grew quiet, Michael stood by the window, looking out at the moonlit garden. Rebecca joined him, a glass of wine in hand. "You've built something beautiful here," she said softly. Michael turned to her, a genuine smile lighting up his face. "I think it's just the beginning." As the night deepened, Michael felt a sense of closure he hadn't thought possible. The scars of betrayal had healed, leaving him stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. Life, he realized, wasn't about erasing the past, but about embracing the future with an open heart. And for the first time in years, Michael was truly ready.